Honestly, it's about time we stop treating the Big 40 like some kind of clinical diagnosis or a slow descent into sometime around 3 in the morning when the house is finally quiet and the hum of the refrigerator feels like the only thing keeping you tethered to reality. You start to feel it. That strange, itchy restlessness in your chest. That isn't heartburn. Jung would have looked at you over his spectacles, maybe lit that pipe of his, and told you that you're finally becoming interesting. See, the first half of your life, that wasn't really you. It was a performance. You were building the persona, that shiny, curated mask you wore to get the promotion, to find a partner, to fit into the suburban mold of a generic American success story. You played the game, you checked the boxers, but now the mask is starting to crack. And thank God for that, because what's underneath is actually alive. We spend decades running from the shadow, those parts of us we deemed too loud, too weird, or too unproductive for the corporate ladder or the PTA meetings. But in your 40s, the shadow starts knocking on the door, demanding a seat at the table. It's not a midlife crisis. It's an insurrection of the soul. You realize the verdict everyone warned you about: the graying hair. The slowing down is just a distraction from the fact that you're finally shedding the skin of who you were supposed to be. Most people in this country are terrified of that transition. They try to Botox the anxiety away or buy a car that screams, "I'm still young." But Jung saw this as the most sacred moment of a human life. It's the individuation process kicking into high gear. It's the moment you stop being a carbon copy and start being an original. It's raw, it's messy, and it smells like old books and rain on a New York sidewalk. But it's the first time you're actually breathing. Honestly, the problem is we've been brainwashed to believe that life is a straight line that only goes up. But the truth is, it's a circle closing in on itself. In America, we have this sickly obsession with the morning, with the high noon sun, with that frantic productivity of someone who thinks they're going to live forever. But nobody tells you that the late afternoon has a much better light, a light that reveals the textures the midday glare was hiding. Jung used to say that we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning, because what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true at evening will have become a lie. It's kind of wild to think about that while you're driving down one of those endless highways, surrounded by billboards promising eternal youth through some supplement or anti-aging cream. American culture is a machine designed to deny death and, by extension, to deny life itself. We hit our 40s desperately trying to fix what isn't even broken, never realizing that the hollow pit in your stomach when you look in the bathroom mirror at 6 a.m. isn't a lack of purpose, it's the weight of everyone else's purposes that you've been lugging around for too long. We become a storage unit for the expectations of our parents, our bosses, the social media algorithms, and then, suddenly, the soul just says, enough. This exhaustion you're feeling isn't a lack of energy. It's your true self trying to pull the plug on a version of you that already died but forgot to fall over. It takes real guts to let that version crumble. It takes courage to look at the void without immediately trying to fill it with a new workout routine or an expensive hobby. Jung called this enantiodromia. That moment when things flip into their opposite, where success turns to ash and failure turns into fertility. It's the smell of wet dirt after a summer thunderstorm in Kansas. It looks like destruction, but it's actually just the ground getting ready for something with real roots. You know, it's funny. We're so terrified of the dark, but you can't see the stars from a brightly lit Starbucks parking lot in the middle of suburbia. To really see what's going on inside, You have to be willing to sit in the shadows for a minute. Jung had this obsession with the shadow, not because he was some gothic edge, but because he knew that everything we reject about ourselves doesn't just vanish. It goes into the basement and starts lifting weights. By the time you hit 40, that basement door is bulging at the hinges. In the States, we're taught to be nice, to be positive, to keep that customer service smile plastered on, even when our inner world is screaming. But those unacceptable parts of you that anger you, suppressed to be a good spouse, the creativity you strangle at, to be a reliable provider, the weirdness you hid, to fit in at the golf club, that's where your untapped power is hiding. Most people hit their 40s and think they're losing their mind because they start feeling resentful or rebellious. But that's just the gold in the shadow, trying to get out. It's like finding an old, dusty box in the attic of a New England colonial and realizing it's full of journals written by a version of you that was actually brave. Integration is the word that academics use, but in real life, it just feels like finally admitting you're a bit of a mess and loving yourself more for it. It's about stopped being a good person so you can finally be a whole person. Think about the relief in that, the sheer physical weight lifting off your shoulders when you realize you don't have to maintain the monument of your reputation anymore. You start to realize that the midlife crisis is actually a midlife awakening, a messy, loud, beautiful reclamation of the parts of yourself you left behind in your 20s because you were too scared of what the neighbors would think. It's like we've been living in a house where half the rooms are locked, and we've been huddled in the hallway trying to pretend the rest of the building doesn't exist. But around your 40s, you start hearing footsteps in those empty rooms. That's the unlived life coming for its due. In America, we're obsessed with the second act, but we usually frame it as a comeback, faster car, a younger look, a pivot to a new tech startup. Jung would have called that a tragedy. A real second act isn't about repeating the first one with more money. It's about a total shift in the gravity of your soul. Think about the way the air feels right before a blizzard in Chicago, that heavy. Electric stillness, where you know everything is about to change color. That's where you are. You start to realize that the verdict society handed you at your past, your prime, that your worth is tied to your 401k or your kids' grades are just flimsy cardboard cutouts. The hell work, the opus, as the old alchemists called it, is finally beginning. You're moving from the hero stage, where it was all about conquering the world, to the sage stage, where it's about understanding the world. It's a move from the ego to the self. And yeah, it's lonely. It's as lonely as a late-night diner on a rainy Tuesday in Seattle. Your friends might not get it. They might still be running that rat race, sweating over the same trivial nonsense. And they'll look at your new quietness or your sudden lack of interest in climbing as a sign of defeat. But you'll know better. You'll know that you're finally stepping out of the collective trance. You're not falling apart. You're falling into place. You're trading the cheap, flickering neon of external validation for a steady internal flame that doesn't need anyone else's oxygen to burn. It's kind of wild when you think about it, but the most dangerous thing you can do in your 40s is to stay balanced. We've been sold this lie, that health is equilibrium, but Jung knew that growth only happens when you're willing to be lopsided for a while. You've spent 40 years leaning one way. Maybe you were the responsible one, the fixer, the logical one, who never let a tear drop in public. Well, now the universe is going to push you the other way, and it's going to feel like you're losing your grip. It's like walking through the humidity of a New Orleans summer night. You can't fight the air. You just have to let it soak into your skin. You start having these dreams, don't you? Strange, vivid scenes that feel more real than your morning commute on the 405. That's your unconscious, trying to bridge the gap. In the US, we treat dreams like junk mail, but they're actually the only honest feedback we get in a world of curated LinkedIn profiles. If you're feeling a sudden urge to paint, to move to the woods, or to finally tell the truth to someone you've been lying to for a decade, that's not instability. It's your psyche trying to achieve syzygy, that perfect, terrifying union of opposites. You're finally integrating the masculine and the feminine, the logic and the magic. You're becoming a person who contains multitudes, and that's a direct threat to a society that wants you to be a predictable consumer. They want you to buy a Peloton. Your soul wants you to sit in a dark room and finally acknowledge your own grief. Choose the grief every single time. Because on the other side of that mourning for your lost youth is a ferocity you didn't know you possessed. You're not a has-been. You're just becoming. And honestly, that's the only version of you that's worth a damn. Look, it's almost funny how we've turned the midlife crisis into a punchline about red Corvettes and questionable hair plugs. Because that's just a cheap American way of avoiding the actual initiation. What's really happening is that the ego, which has been the captain of the ship for 40 years, is finally being demoted, and it's pissed off. It's like a CEO being told he's now just a consultant. But you need that deal. If you don't step down from your own throne, you'll never see the kingdom for what it really is. Jung understood that the soul doesn't care about your mortgage or your status at the country club. It cares about meaning. And meaning is a heavy, visceral thing. It's the weight of a cast-iron skillet, the grit of salt on a winter road in Maine. You start to look at your life and ask, is this all there is? Not because you ye ungrateful, but because you're starving for something that isn't made of plastic. In our culture, we're taught to fix that hunger with a new experience or a pivot. But the real answer is much scarier. You have to stay with the hunger. You have to let it burn away the parts of you that are just social constructs. It's about realizing that your personality was mostly just a defense mechanism. When you stop defending, you start existing. It's the difference between a manicured lawn in a gated community and a wild forest that's been allowed to grow over the ruins. One is pretty, the other is sacred. By the time you're halfway through your 40s, the verdict of society starts to sound like white noise. You realize that the only person who can judge your life is the child you used to be and the old man you're going to become. Everyone else is just a ghost in the machine. You're finally free to be unproductive in the eyes of the world, which is the only way to be truly fertile in the eyes of the spirit. It's messy. It's terrifying. And it's the first time you've actually been awake. There's this specific kind of silence that hits you in your late 40s, like the quiet of a desert highway in Nevada just before the sun breaks. It's a silence that demands an answer. For years, we've been running on complexes, those little psychological knots that make us overreact to our bosses or desperately seek approval from people we don't even like. We lived our lives as a reaction to our childhood wounds, trying to prove we were smart enough, tough enough, or worthy of love. But in this stage, you realized that the people you were trying to impress are either gone or just as lost as you are. It's a liberation that feels a lot like grief. Jung talked about the religious function of the soul, and he didn't mean going to church on Sundays or following some dogmatic script. He meant finding that thing that links you to something eternal. I-D-U-S. We try to find that link in brand loyalty or political tribalism, but those are just hollow substitutes for a real inner life. You're at the age where you have to stop looking for a savior and start being your own anchor. It's about circumambulation, the process of circling around the center of who you are. getting closer with every year, every mistake, and every gray hair. You aren't aging in the sense of decaying. You're ripening. Think about a piece of fruit on a tree in a Georgia orchard. It has to endure the heat and the bugs to finally get sweet. Your 40s are that ripening. You're finally shedding the acidity of youth, that sharp, judgmental, brittle energy, and replacing it with a depth that can actually nourish others. You stop being a consumer of life and stop being a witness to it. And the most beautiful part, once you stop caring about the verdict of being young, you become dangerous. You become someone who can't be bought because you finally know what you're worth, and it has nothing to do with the number on your paycheck. It's kind of wild. But we live in a culture that treats the self like a project to be finished, when Jung knew it's actually a mystery to be lived. By the time you're pushing 50, you start to realize that the verdicts handed down by society, the ones that told you to be balanced or stable, were actually just cages. Real stability isn't staying the same. It's the ability to hold the tension between who you were and who you're becoming. It's like the way a suspension bridge in San Francisco groans and sways in the wind. If it didn't have that give, it would snap. Most people our age are brittle. They're holding on to their 20s with white-knuckled desperation, terrified that if they let go, they'll disappear. But Jung's whole point was that you have to die before you actually die. You have to let the ego's version of your life fall away so the soul can breathe. It's like that smell of wood smoke on a crisp autumn evening in Vermontitz. The smell of things burning down, yeah, but it's also the smell of warmth and survival. You start to appreciate the bitter flavors of life. You stop chasing the sugar high of constant novelty and start looking for the substance. You realize that your failures, the divorce, the lost job, the dreams that didn't pan out were actually the most honest things that ever happened to you. They stripped away the insulation and left you standing naked in the truth. And honestly, the truth is a lot more comfortable than the lie ever was. You stop trying to find yourself in a self-help book or a retreat and realize you've been here all along, hiding under the floorboards of your own life. Your 40s aren't the end of the road. They're the moment you finally step off the paved highway and start walking into the woods, where the air is cleaner and the path is yours alone to make. Honestly, there is a certain kind of power in finally being disqualified from the beauty pageant of youth. It's like the heavy, metallic smell of a subway station in Philadelphia. It's not pretty, but it's real. It's grounded, and it's moving you somewhere important. We spend the first half of our lives obsessed with individualism, which is just a fancy American word for being a lonely atom, competing with other atoms. But as you deep dive into your 40s, Jung invites you into individuation, which is the exact opposite. It's about realizing you're part of the collective unconscious, a massive ancient ocean that flows through every dream, every myth, and every heartbeat. You start to see your own struggles mirrored in the stories of people who lived thousands of years ago. You're not just a middle-aged person staring at a spreadsheet. You're an archetype. You're the wounded healer, the searcher, the wise fool. This realization is the ultimate verdict against the isolation of modern life. When you stop trying to be special in the eyes of the world, you become significant in the eyes of the soul. You start to look at your wrinkles, not as flaws, but as a map of every war you've survived and every laugh that was actually worth the air it took to breathe. In the U.S., we're so afraid of being used up. But Jung would say a life that isn't used up is a life that was never lived. You want to be like an old leather jacket that's been through 100 storms and finally fits perfectly. You're no longer a spectator in your own life, waiting for permission to start. You are the permission you realize that the real beginning isn't about starting a new career or a new marriage. It's about finally showing up to the one life you've always had, but were too busy to notice. It's the quiet roar of a bonfire in the middle of a dark field that doesn't ask for attention, but its heat is the only thing that matters. So, here we are at the edge of the woods, and I'll tell you, the most radical thing you can do now is to simply refuse to apologize for your own complexity. We've spent this whole trip talking about Zhang, but at the end of the day, it's about that feeling in your gut when you walk out onto your porch on a cold Tuesday night and realize the stars don't care about your mortgage. The verdict is in, and the verdict is, you are free. You're free from the obligation to be promising. You're free from the crushing weight of being a rising star. You've already risen, you've already flickered, and now you get to be the fire itself. In America, we're terrified of the second half because we think it's just a long, slow goodbye. But for Jung, this was the grand opening. This is where you stop being a passenger in the cultural narrative and start writing the script with your own blood and bone. It's like the sound of a blues guitar in a smoky bar in Memphis. It's got some grit, it's got some pain, but man, it's got soul that a clean digital track could never touch. Your 40s are your real beginning because you finally have enough data to know that the world's rewards are mostly tinsel. You've seen the shadows, you've hugged your demons, and you're still standing. That's not a crisis. That's a victory lap. So, stop looking for the exit. Stop waiting for midlife recovery. There is nothing to recover from except the lie that you were ever finished. Take a deep breath of that crisp, uncertain air. The mask is gone. The floorboards are steady. The sun is setting on the person you were supposed to be. And thank God for that. Because the person you actually are is finally stepping into the light. It's a hell of a thing to finally meet yourself after all these years. Don't look back. You've got work to do. And for the first time in your life, it's actually your work.